This is a Geek Leader. Hey, Geek Leaders, welcome to episode 136 of the podcast, and Happy New Year's! And this episode is sponsored by Splashtop. Splashtop is the preferred remote access and remote support software. There are three main products that you can choose from depending on who you are and what you need. Splashtop Business Access for individuals and small teams. That's one of the products that I use personally and love it. Splashtop Remote Support for IT and MSPs. We also use that at our company, and it's a fantastic solution. And Splashtop SOS for support and help desk teams. Splashtop uses robust security measures, keeping your data safe and protecting all of your employees and computers that you are accessing. And you can start a free trial today, and you'll see why so many users are leaving other remote access softwares and switching to Splashtop, because you get all the same features, better performance at a fraction of the cost. And if you don't believe it, you should at least try it out. Get a free trial plus 20% off for any listeners to A Geek Leader. Just go to ageekleader.com/splashtop. Again, I've been using this software for 7 years, and from a personal standpoint and from the professional standpoint, it is fantastic. I love using it with my iPad, with my iPhone, being able to remote into Windows and Mac machines. It's a great solution, highly recommended. For 20% off and a free trial, go to ageekleader.com/splashtop. Hey, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, we've got Rockford Lhotka. He's the CTO of Magenic, and he's been working at this company for 19 years and working on an open source project for even longer than that we're going to talk about today. Rocky, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
If you don't mind telling the audience just a little bit about how you got started in technology, what was that journey like for you, and how has that led to where you are today, just to give some context to our listeners?
I got started in high school, and really back in those days, I guess for me at least, I lived in rural Minnesota, and so the only computers I had access to were through my high school. And I don't know. I was always interested in science back at that point in time, and this was also when the whole arcade, like asteroids and things like that, were first starting to become a real thing. And just the whole idea of being able to create something out of nothing, I guess, really captured my imagination, and drove me to seek out how to figure out how I could do that for a career. And so I ended up going to college and getting a computer science degree. So what was that, in college? Was it what you expected? Was it, I know for me, like when I started computer science, it kind of wasn't what I thought it was going to be, but I ended up growing to love it just the same. I would agree with that. I actually had no understanding of what it would be. I kind of through high school started learning how to program, and myself and Mr. Johnson, one of the math teachers, he was also learning, and so the two of us kept comparing notes, and which is an odd thing, right? When you're a kid and you're kind of at a peer level with one of your teachers, but that was, I would discover how to do a sort algorithm, and he would discover how to do something else, and because this all predates the internet, so. To a large degree, discover meant invent yourself. So it was way more challenging than it is today, I think, just because we were so isolated. And so I had no frame of reference. And when I got into the computer science program at the university level, it was, I guess kind of the same thing. I found friends or other folks that were in the program that had shared the same love of learning that I did. And there were also, of course, a whole bunch of students involved that were, I don't know, they didn't seem to care. They were there because it was a career choice that they would make money, or there were some of us that were constantly in the computer lab comparing notes and trying to out-hack each other, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then a whole bunch of other people that came to class and did the assignments and took the tests, but they were not the people that hung out in the computer lab. And I've often thought it would be interesting, and I don't know how you would do this, but it would be interesting to find out now, many years later, of the people that kind of self-selected as we were there because we loved it versus the people that were there to get a degree, what kind of career paths, is that an indicator of anything or not? I don't know. It's just like a social science thing, I guess.
That would be interesting to see, like correlate the number of hours spent in the computer lab versus the successful careers. I don't know how you would do that, though.
Yeah, I don't either, but I do think it would be interesting because, of course, our small group kind of, held ourselves above everybody else, and I kind of regret that looking back on it because I'm not sure that was all that useful. But we're like, yeah, we're the ones that really love this stuff, and you all are posers, Mm-hmm. And,
yeah, I know. And when I think back about what language did you study in college, and how is that different from what you're doing today?
Our college primarily used Pascal and an assembly language. Those were the two. Although I went to the business school and also learned COBOL and RPG2, and that was never was useful to me. Well, not directly. And I took one class that had Fortran, and that actually did end up being directly useful later in my career. I've always been of the belief that it's a good idea to learn multiple language families. And that really came out of that experience in college, I guess, and that I just wanted to learn stuff. So I kept, every time that there was something new to learn about computing, I would go learn it. And then it helped me a lot in my career, though, because in my career, I actually ended up using a little Pascal very early on, but then used many other languages. And the fact that I already knew things as disparate as COBOL, Fortran, Pascal, and assembly made it pretty easy to learn other, like I learned C and wrote a terminal emulator in C in relatively short order because I already had, it's easy to pick up a new language if you've got multiple other languages that you've got some comprehension on.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think, language is just another tool in your tool bag. Once you've kind of figured out how a couple of them work, you can add more without much effort. As long as you put forth the work. So when you got your first job, where was that? What was that like, and kind of how has that evolved to your where you're at today?
When I graduated from college, the U.S. was in kind of a recession, mid to late 80s, and in Minnesota, which at the time was a hotbed for software and hardware. We had some really big companies here, Honeywell, CDC, and a bunch of others. And most of them had laid off hundreds, if not thousands of people. So there was basically, I spent as an entry-level person with no experience at all, I spent several months doing part-time data entry to pay the bills while I looked for a job. And I took the first job I could find, the first, quote unquote, real job. And even though they were hiring me to program using BASIC of all programming languages, it was on a DEC VAX, which is what I'd used in college. And so, and they were willing to pay me enough to cover my rent. So I'm like, yay, I'll take, whatever. And in retrospect, though, I couldn't have found a better job because it was for a small ISV that built software for the concrete ready mix companies to dispatch the trucks, take orders, manage inventory, and so and because it was a small company, I was one of 5 developers, and so the ability to get involved in every aspect of a small business, both our small business and also our customers, and then almost immediately get high levels of responsibility for coding because we were such a small team. I don't know. I look back on it and it was just a fantastic jumpstart. And 2, I was very fortunate in that the manager of our team, Mark, was a very accomplished software, I don't know, developer, engineer, architect, whatever term you want to use. He was not a particularly great people person, but coming out of college where you just kind of make up your own coding styles, and usually the professors don't care as long as things work, right? Mm-hmm. He was extremely like he had coding standards, and he would spend his evenings reviewing everybody's code every day. And you'd come in the morning and have a printout of your code redlined with all the places where you deviated from the coding standard. And I must say I chafed under that for a while, but then we got acquired by another company not long after that, and they had no coding standards. And that really, of all the things that I learned in that job, which were many, but this one was so big because the five of us, we could work on each other's code at any point because we all conformed to Mark's coding standards. And this other company also had 5 developers, and none of their code looked even remotely similar to each other. And so they were mostly unable to maintain each other's code, which I think was on purpose, right? It was a type of job security. But what a nightmare. Oh my God. So
yeah, I'm guessing there was no code reviews at that point either.
No source control. This predates all the good, happy things we have today. Our source control was the nightly backups, which sadly, for better or worse, I got to exercise that once as a newbie developer because I accidentally deleted the entire source tree.
Ouch.
And everybody's like, "Oh, we won't be seeing you tomorrow." But luckily, I got to keep my job. So.
Well, it's one of those things. That's a very expensive lesson, but it's a lesson you'll never make, a mistake you'll never make again.
Boy, that's for sure.
So with the lessons you've learned, I guess that's a really good example of learning the importance of I guess procedures and policies and standards that you can apply to coding. How has that kind of taken you further in your career and helped you when it comes into a leadership role?
Well, from that job, which ultimately moved my wife and I, my brand new wife at that time, we were just married, and we got acquired by this other company, and they moved us from Minnesota to Alabama. And that's a whole story unto itself, because understanding the differences of culture across America is got driven home to me in a big way at that point. But we were just ready to start our family, so we wanted to move back close to grandparents and that sort of thing. And so I got a job working at a biomedical manufacturing company in Minnesota, and we moved back. And I started there as a developer, but within a couple of years, moved into a management role. Actually, not development either, but on the system administration side. And a lot of the lessons I had learned about the value of repeatability, the value of having everybody following the same or at least similar processes and stuff was just a huge thing, because when you get into that ops side, especially in my case, I managed or supervised, I should say, the help desk. The chaos that exists in that part of our industry is really hard to manage. And here too, I had a fantastic boss named Dan, who was really good at the kind of the corporate politics, I would say, because this was a bigger company. And he worked to build an understanding amongst all the managers, directors, VPs in the company that we couldn't just drop everything because somebody took the time to walk down and ask a developer to do some work. Or whoever was standing in line at the help desk didn't automatically win. There had to be some objective prioritization. And so between Dan doing all of that and then, I guess I brought a lot of order to the chaos at a more tactical level. We ended up being able to, with a I think our team ultimately was maybe 11 people to run a 300-person company, from an IT side. And that was, half of our group was developers and half were help desk and system admin type folks. And ultimately, I found out that I really, really don't like doing system admin or managing a help desk. And so when the opportunity to move back onto the app dev side and become the supervisor for the development team opened up, I'm like, oh, let me please let me do that. So,
so that was kind of your first take into leadership. What was the difference between, or how did you transition? Was it an easy transition? Was it kind of something you kind of felt comfortable about, or was it, because you seem like you like people, you seem like a good people person, especially with your speaking career in the past. But was it hard or easy? Because some people, I've talked to a lot of people about this, and a lot of people say it was difficult. Some people say it was easy. Some people say that they're still trying to figure it out, so they don't know yet. So what is your take?
For me, it was challenging. I loved and to this day really love the technology and love building software. And you're right. I like people, and I'm a fairly decent people person, but I think it was a combination of I really wanted to be successful, and part of the driver, I think, for becoming a supervisor or a manager or it basically climbing those levels is that you get more control over your own destiny. Mm-hmm. And I think not everybody, but a lot of us want more control over, but it's a trade-off, because you don't just get to control your destiny. You as you climb up, you by definition end up affecting other people's destinies too. Or if not their destiny, their day-to-day activity. And it's an awesome responsibility, even at a supervisor level. And so again, I give a lot of credit to especially Dan, the guy I worked for at the time. He kept bringing books in. He's like, all right, so you need to read 1 Minute Manager, and you need to read this book and that book and the other book. And I'm like, well, I don't want to read these. They have nothing to do with technology. And he's like, yeah, but you're not going to be successful doing this job if all you do is focus on the technology. And so, yeah, I would agree with what you said with other folks you've interviewed, that it was not an easy transition. And at the time, I didn't have the perspective that I do now, but I look at it now and I think, especially the further up you get, at some point, for most people, you should understand that you are in fact switching careers from being a technologist, and that's true whether you're a sysadmin person or a developer. For most people, and I've been very fortunate, I didn't make this choice, but for most people, you end up having to say, you know what, I'm going to give up the technology. Maybe not at a high level understanding, but at a deep level practitioner. I can't afford to be a tech practitioner and be an excellent manager, because being an excellent manager is a career unto itself. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a huge commitment.
Mm-hmm. No, I think I struggle with that as well, because, going from, I was, managing a development team, and then I was in the development team and became the manager of the development team. And it was difficult for me to kind of step back and let go of some of the code. Luckily, I didn't have to let go of all of it until I got to the role that I'm at now. But, that was a really challenging part for me to say, I need to focus my time, instead of learning this new framework, I need to focus my time learning, how do I communicate with my team, or how do I manage a project, or how do I do one-on-ones? And there was so many other things that I needed to focus on learning. I didn't have time to do both.
This is something in my current job at Magenic that for many, many years we wrestle, and I think most companies probably do wrestle with this, is some folks that are technologists, and I'll just pick developers, but I think this applies to people in QA, ops, doesn't really matter.
Yep.
Some people don't want to ever give up the tech. but yet they want to be acknowledged as advancing in their career. And so they don't want to put in the time and energy to become a good manager or a good supervisor. And so it's not beneficial for an employer to say, hey, we're going to put you, we're going to promote you to a team lead or more, and ignore the fact that you're not good at it. You don't want to be good at it. You want to be, the best possible developer that you can be, or the best possible sysadmin, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so we've, and in particular myself, but as a company, we've tried to provide as much of an avenue as possible for people like that to grow in their careers in a way that acknowledges that, yes, they are, hopefully maybe one of the best in the industry, or, they're top tier people, but they're not a lead, right? And then simultaneously open up opportunities for people to become like a dev lead or a team lead, and like you said, keep one foot in the tech and the other foot becoming a good manager. And some of those folks ultimately choose to give up the foot in tech and truly embrace being a manager, which of course brings you on a whole different career path, because at that point you become a what people call a businessman, right? or business person.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really hard to go back once you've made that decision, because you got to go back at a lower level than you left, because you left some of that knowledge behind.
Yeah, and that's the trick here, is it's to remain a top tier technologist in and of itself is a full-time thing, because the technology is changing so fast. And 5 years ago, who would have thought that containers and whatnot would be taking over the server world like it is? Mm-hmm. And if you're a practitioner and you're not in the midst of retooling yourself to understand all of the good and bad points of running your software in a container-based environment, you're doing yourself a disservice. But if you're on the, 1 foot in tech and 1 foot in the management side, in my view, again, the management, the leadership side is just as big a deal. And there's a huge amount to learn to be a really good leader. And it's constantly honing your craft. So it's actually very similar. And so I don't think it's for very few people can you juggle both of those plus actually have a life.
Yeah. And I think if you don't have that life, you're going to fail on one or both of those eventually.
I think you're right. Yep. And in my case, I got married, we had kids, and that's a big thing. At least I thought. So that caused a lot of rebalancing of my priorities, through that time period, because I had been very focused on the tech and my job, and I remain so. But you have to rebalance, because I value my family as well.
Yeah, no, I went through that same thing. I know when I have 3 kids. When my second kid was born, I was still in that relatively new manager phase, trying to put in all the hours, trying to know everything about the tech, as well as learning to manage the people, just putting a ton of hours. And I forgot who it was, but I was talking to somebody, and they said, you need to put some boundaries around your life, put some boundaries of when work ends and when home starts, and so on and so forth. And so I don't know what it was, the exact event, but something just snapped in me one day. So I went to my boss and said, look, I'm leaving work at 6 o'clock. I'm going to turn off my phone. I'm not going to check email. I'm not going to do a thing until my kids go to bed, and then I'll jump back on and check. But I'm not going to stay late anymore unless there's absolute emergency. I'm not going to do this. And I found out my work life actually improved, because now I had a boundary. Now I had an end date. I had a time that I had to finish something, so I was kind of more motivated to make sure I got it done. And I found that I was just working a little bit harder and a little bit smarter during that time.
I've observed that too, less with myself, because I took a different approach to get that balance. But I've worked with people that just kind of hang around the office, and work is a social thing to some people. Mm-hmm. Well, I think to most people, but to some people it's extremely social, and they're not particularly in a hurry to go home because they enjoy the people that they're working with, and they, at least I shouldn't describe motivations to people, but I see that, and then other people are very like you said, very, very focused on, I've got to get this done, and I've got to get it done by 5 or 4 or 6 or whatever, because because I'm not taking it home, and I'm not, and it's not like they're not social and they don't value their work friendships,
Right?
but it's pretty clear that their priorities are different, and that they're there to get their tasks done so that they can go home with a clear conscience and focus on something else.
Yeah, for sure. A big part of your career has kind of been on the speaking stage too, as an evangelist. What was that transition like, moving from, I guess, developer or to an evangelist? Because I've seen, I've never been an evangelist, although I do speak at a lot of conferences. And sometimes you get this idea that, oh, you're not in the code anymore, you're not creating anymore. Did you ever get that feeling, or is it something you've always been able to continue to do, so you never got that point?
There have been 2 points in my career where I, for better or worse, got myself completely out of the technology. And in both cases, I, not long after, realized how dreary my life was, and took steps to get myself back into the tech. And but neither of those had to do with the speaking. Interestingly enough, they had to do with the first time was my kind of youthful blind exuberance of, well, you get in your career and you climb, and every time there's a chance to get a promotion or to climb, you take that. And I climbed myself right out of technology into a pure management role, and I wasn't ready for it. I got promoted, the Peter principle. I got promoted before I was ready. And I got promoted into a job that was 100% people and 0% tech. And some people thrive on that. I've got friends and coworkers that have gone through a similar path, and they just excelled, and really it motivates them every day to come to work and help build up other people's careers, right? And I get that. I felt that. But man, I just missed the technology. And so luckily I was able a few months later to do kind of a lateral sidestep back into a role where I was supervising or managing, directing. I don't even know what the term is, but had loose direction over a whole bunch of architects, and got back into the technology side. From the speaking perspective, when I was in high school, I was in speech and debate, competitive. So instead of doing a whole lot of sports or whatever, I did a whole lot of that. And so I've built some of those skills and a level of comfort around speaking from a pretty early age. And in fact, when I went into university, I was thinking, gee, I could go into computers, or I could become a teacher. And the lure of the tech, won out, obviously. But I always had kind of this feeling like I would enjoy being a teacher. And so when opportunities came up to give presentations and to do some speaking, I took those. I really got into the professional speaking after I'd published, I want to say, my first 2 books. And so that's part of the trick, is especially in the commercial speaking circuit, which I've been involved with for a very long time, and it's not as big as it used to be. Back at that point, the only real conferences were commercial conferences, and they're picky about their speakers because they are, they exist to make money selling tickets to their conference, right? Mm-hmm. And so it took some effort to get into that. These days, the opportunities are much more plentiful because there's meetups and there's a lot of regional conferences and the commercial conferences that actually pay their speakers and charge attendees still exist, but they're not a prevalent model like they once were.
Yeah, I know. You mentioned that they're plentiful now. I recommend everybody to give it a try at least once. When I was first starting out in development many years ago, I wanted to go to several conferences just to learn, to network with people. I was working in Rock Hill, South Carolina. There's not a whole lot of tech around that area unless you go up to Charlotte. And I was just trying to, meet people and learn more about what other companies are doing. And I found some conferences, but my company wouldn't pay for me to go to the conferences. So I was like, well, how do I get to go there? And someone says, why don't you speak at it? If you speak, you get to go for free. It's like, oh, that's a great idea. And I'd never spoken in front of people before, so I had no idea what I was doing there either. But it all worked out really well, and I enjoyed it, and I continue to do so today.
Yeah, and I think that's an awesome, I do kind of chuckle because you said, I think everybody should do that. And one of the biggest phobias that exists out there is fear of public speaking. So
I know.
I agree with you. It's a great thing for people to do, but I'm skeptical that it's always going to be a minority of people that either don't have that phobia or choose to overcome it.
Yeah. There was so I was managing a team of 5 developers, and something got into me, and I told them that I require them to speak at an event, either a meetup or a conference somewhere, because I thought it was such a great idea for them to break their mold. And after I told them that, everybody, that was your goal for the year. One of your goals for the year is you have to speak at a conference or meetup. That failed miserably because they came to me like, no way I'm doing this. There's just no way. I was like, oh, it'll be really good for you to grow as a person. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing it. And I was like, so I had to backpedal on that one. One of those early manager mistakes.
Yep.
So how has, speaking at conferences kind of helped you move into the role that you're at now as a CTO? Or has it?
Well, I think it has. Through the kind of mid to late 90s, I started writing books, and like I said, that got me into the speaking circuit. And at the time, I was working for a consulting company, and though the combination of doing those two things really benefited my employer a great deal, both from a recruiting perspective because of just name recognition for myself and the company I was working for at the time. But also driving some level of sales. It's not a huge deal, but when you're out there speaking, it generates a level of credibility, and people are like, "Hey, can I get the company that Rocky works at to come and help us out?" And unfortunately, the company I worked for at the time was very happy that I was doing it as long as I did it on my own time, using vacation and whatnot. And it's also the case that that was also right when my second son was born. And, so I was looking for yet another shift in work-life balance. And my employer was like, hey, you should work full-time for us. And we love it when you burn your vacation to go do these other things. And I was, it wasn't working for me. And so I wouldn't say a friend, but let's go with mentor. A mentor of mine in the community in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. His name is Greg. I was bouncing these ideas off Greg, and he was giving me different kinds of advice because he was the CEO of a competing consulting company, and it was good advice. And some of it worked, and some of it my employer was unwilling to budge. And after a couple years of doing that, and not really getting the success I wanted, the balance that I really was after, I eventually went back to Greg and I said, so, hey, Greg, all that advice you've been giving me is awesome. Do you really believe it? And he said, why? And I said, well, maybe I should come work for you. And that's actually what happens. That's how I ended up at Magenic, Greg, the owner of Magenic, was for a couple of years, mentoring me to be better at working for his competitor, which is kind of weird. But eventually I'm like, yeah, how about if I go work for you instead? And so Magenic highly valued, and still does, the ideas of having people that are writing and speaking, and both from a personal growth perspective, but also it's got a big impact on a consulting company's ability to recruit top talent and retain people, and also have a level of credibility in sales that's otherwise hard to achieve.
So, what was that conversation like when you're like, hey, you want to hire me? Or was there a position already available? Or, I mean, I've never had the, I guess, courage to kind of go to someone and say, hey, can you hire me if there's not a position available?
Well, yeah, this was one of those deals where I had, a multi-year relationship with Greg at this point. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't say we were friends, but, we knew each other fairly well. And I knew that I needed to do something drastic as a change. I also had another friend that ran a consulting company in Chicago named Keith. And so I was having similar conversations with Keith, too. And I think that's maybe part of it is that I agree with you. It'd be difficult at best to come up to a stranger and say, hey, by the way, But I was talking to two people that I had, very good personal relationships with, and see how with both of them, it was more or less, especially Greg though, it was pretty much, hey, so all that stuff you've been saying, do you how much of it did you actually mean? And he's like, well, I meant all of it, and I said, well, maybe I should come, work for you, and no, there was not a position. At either company, at Magenic or Keith's company in Chicago, open, but both companies were in a growth period at that point, and positions materialize if a company is growing, and you encounter somebody that's particularly interesting for whatever reason, positions tend to materialize. That's been my observation. Companies, if the economy is bad or company is not growing, obviously, positions don't materialize. So it's a confluence of, having the right relationships, having the right skill set that's desirable, and then also having the company you're talking to being in a position where they can expand and absorb a new position.
So, after you tell us first, what does Magenic do? What is it? I'm not familiar with the company, or I wasn't before we started talking about this. So, can you tell the audience a little bit about what they do and what your role is there?
Magenic is a software development consulting company, and we've got I don't know the exact head count, but let's say around 700 consultants in 8 offices around the U.S. and also in Manila, and we're almost 25 years old, or just entering our 25th year. And we build custom software, usually at the enterprise level. So we, at some points, we'll bring in tactical teams of developers or designers or QA people to provide extra horsepower to a company. But other times we'll come in and actually help do the early discovery and figuring out exactly what needs to happen to form a project that can be successful, and then project management and business analysts and the whole 9 yards will come in and help our customers build something that they need.
Okay. And what is your role there?
I'm the CTO. I've been here a little over 19 years, or 18, 19, over 19 years. The first 10 years, I was, as you said earlier, my title was technology evangelist, and that was because joining the company, a lot of the value proposition was around my writing and speaking, and providing kind of architectural level consulting to our customers, and so it was a nice blend. And after about 10 years of doing that, I thought that it'd be fun, eventually, as fun as that was and is, I love it. I love it. But after a decade of doing the same thing, you kind of sometimes want to change. And so I was like, well, maybe I should get more involved in the day-to-day operations of Magenic. And so, we switched my role to be CTO, and I still do a fair amount of writing and speaking and so forth, but I'm much more involved in the way Magenic itself operates. And so I run what we call our thought leadership team. which is a group of folks. Each person in my team represents a community of practice within Magenic. So .NET app dev and Java app dev and mobile and QA and security and so forth. And so my team has really, I would say, three big roles. We do sales support at a high level across the whole company. We do, or at least coordinate internal training, because we've got a fairly aggressive set of ongoing training that we create and run inside of Magenic. And my team coordinates all of that. And then we also do some level of external, what we call external evangelism. So be that encouraging people to do blogging or speaking at events, or some folks write books. I mean, we're pretty happy with anything that helps us more or less give back to the industry in a credible way. So we're at one level, obviously, there's a marketing angle to it, because if we do this, it's beneficial to Magenic. But I'm interested in providing content that actually has value. That people can read an article, and like one of the guys that works for me is in the middle of writing a series of articles on how to create a Kubernetes cluster out of Raspberry Pi 4s, and it's an interesting series of blog posts, because it's very, very geeky, and yet at the same time, Kubernetes is it kind of highlights that. If you're going to go down the road of using Kubernetes, which a lot of people are, you probably want to use a managed Kubernetes offering from AWS or Azure or something, because all the nitpicky stuff you have to do to set up your own cluster is, for a lot of us, it might be fun, but it's definitely a very geeky thing.
Yeah, especially on Raspberry Pis.
Well, it does add some extra complexity, that's for sure.
Oh, man. So I want to back up just a little bit, because you got into writing kind of before you got into speaking. What was your motivation to get into writing?
Similarly to the speaking, I think, it's a form of teaching in a sense. But what really, in the end, I've observed over the years that some folks look at writing a book as a boost to their career, and it really can be. Mm-hmm. And so there's no doubt that was part of my motivation. Part of my motivation is my desire to teach, and books are a way of teaching. And part of it, I'm also a very avid fan, I guess you'd say, of science fiction. And so my wife and I were when Babylon 5, the TV show, wrapped up, we went to the wrap party and listened to the creator of the show, J. Michael Straczynski, gave a talk. And one of the things that he was talking about is, in his view, the difference between a writer and an author. And people have their own definitions, but his is, people. There's a lot of people in the world that write, and they write to make money. And then there are authors, and authors write because they can't not do it. And that really resonated with me. His point is that some people have something inside them that needs to get out, some set of ideas or whatever. And writing is the way that they choose to get that out. But then they can't stop because they have other stuff they need to get out. And I guess for me, it turns out that I'm more of an author than I am a writer. And it's not a value judgment, right? Like I said, I've had a number of people over the years that I have written a book, and they're like, wow, that was hard. I'll never do that again in my life, but it was absolutely great for my career. And I mean, who can look down on that? That's awesome, right? But in my case, I just have had an ongoing series of things that I've wanted to get out. And I find writing is a good way to get it out. It's a good way for people to consume it. And a side effect for me of writing, and this is true of writing an in-depth blog or a white paper just as much as it is a book, is it forces you to organize your thoughts in a way at a level of discipline and depth that you would probably never do otherwise. Because you can learn something and learn how to do it for yourself and call it a day and say, hey, that was good. I know how to do that. But if you're actually going to explain to somebody else how to do it and why they should do it, that forces you to learn it more deeply and also to organize your thoughts in a way that you can express it to somebody else and bring them along. And I find that process very enjoyable. So, to some degree, the reason I've kept writing all these years is because to me, that's an enjoyable process, and I get a good feeling when I'm done. And so it's not altruistic by any stretch.
Yeah, that's kind of like some of my episodes are solo shows where I've written something and I want to talk about that, and I'm the same way. I feel like I have to get it out, and it also helps me reinforce it myself. Like if I'm going to write about this or talk about this, I've really got to learn it. I've got to know it better than I think I do. And I teach part-time at Winthrop University, and it's the same thing when I'm setting up for my class. When I'm going to go teach something, I'm going to make sure that I know it. And it also forces me to keep current with it and to stay on top of it, because you never know what kind of questions are going to come after something I taught and say, hey, you spoke about this. What did you mean by X, Y, and Z? And I just enjoy that part of it, of staying current. And, people will ask me, well, why do you still teach? Well, because I can't not teach. I've been doing it for 15 years now. I'm not going to stop.
I understand entirely. Yep.
So you also have been involved with an open source project. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
One of the outgrowths of my early books that I started writing in the mid-'90s was, and I was fascinated at the time, and to some degree still am, with the idea of combining object-oriented design concepts with distributed computing. I've always been fascinated by distributed computing, and which is part of why all the containers and Kubernetes, all this stuff today is so much fun. But using that distributed computing and also getting the benefits of object-oriented design is really quite a challenging thing to combine. And so the first couple books that I wrote really focused on how to do that using, at the time, the Microsoft's COM and DCOM technologies and Microsoft Transaction Server. And an accidental outgrowth of that was a framework that made it easier for people to use those technologies. And at the time, what we think of today as open source was just nascent. And so I released that stuff all as freeware at the time. That used to be a term. And then over time, that becomes what we think of today as open source. And of course, that was back in the 90s with COM. I rewrote this framework and kind of more formalized it yet into the .NET world in the early 2000s. And but it became pretty widely used. At the time, it was very common to write software that had some sort of a Windows front end, because Windows was the dominant operating system pretty much everywhere. So you could just assume Windows front end and both the COM VB6 technologies in the 90s and then .NET provided the ability to use the same languages, the same DLLs running on your servers and your clients. And so CSLA really ties into that. The framework's purpose is to give a home for business logic. So we've got all these great UI frameworks these days, Angular and React and WPF and whatever else, all these great frameworks to create UIs. And we've got all these great frameworks, like Hibernate and Entity Framework and whatever else to talk to databases. But there are very few, if any, great frameworks to create business layers. And that's what CSLA strives for, is to be this first-class framework so that you can create the UI with the UI framework, you can create the data access with the data access framework. Oh, and by the way, you can create a reusable and maintainable, that's probably more important, business layer using CSLA. And so it's been something I've been working on in different forms, starting in, it has its origins, I think, in 1995, but it became public in 96 or early 97, and has rolled forward to this day. So, and now because of WebAssembly, the ability to run non-JavaScript code in browsers, right? So run C# or C++ or Go or all these different languages in the browser really brings back this opportunity to have the term didn't used to be, this full stack developer term is a recent term, but that was a lot of us for a very long time, right? In that we would write the app server code, and we'd write the client code. We'd just write it all in one language.
Yeah, that's all you had, though. You were the developer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And now the full stack person has to hope that they can learn all of the intricacies of a JavaScript UI framework and all the intricacies of .NET or Java plus SQL. Mm-hmm. And it's like, wow, what a tall order, So I'm so excited about WebAssembly because I think it brings us back to where it's very realistic to say, hey, I know Java, and I write Java on the server, I write Java on the client, and I write SQL. Or I write C# on the server, I write C# on the client, and I know SQL. And it's just and so the .NET part, the .NET running in the browser as a first-class peer to JavaScript, which is what WebAssembly gets us, means that my framework comes back to being amazingly powerful again, because you can create your business logic using CSLA, and then you can choose to deploy it to the client, to the server, or both. But you write the DLL in the code just once.
Very cool. Very cool. Where can people find out more about it? And maybe pull it down. Is it on GitHub or?
It is on GitHub. The easiest way is to go to cslanet.com.
Okay.
But that's a GitHub hosted website, and it'll aim you at the repo and everything.
Okay, I'll link that up in the show notes so that people can check that out and hopefully get some use out of it for sure. Do you have any tips for new leaders or new managers out there that are maybe struggling with this transition into management and leadership?
I think my biggest tip is to recognize what you're doing and do it intentionally, and understand that you're becoming a supervisor, much less a manager, director, and etc. That's a career path by itself, and there's a whole set of skills that you need to build and hone to become really good at being a supervisor, manager, and a leader. Which are, again, those are actually two different things too, right? But I think most of us that go down that road want to be a leader in our role as supervisor, right? Or they want to be a leader via being a manager. Yeah. And so there are really good books out there. Different people like a lot of different books. Believe it or not, 1 Minute Manager is still one that I think is fantastic, even though it's extremely old. I also like Daniel Pink's Drive. It's a fantastic book.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, but I think probably the tip is not the specific books. The tip is that if you're choosing to go down this road, do it intentionally and seek to become good at it. And that will mean, at least for me, it meant stepping outside of my comfort zone. Reading these books. Talking to people that were good, that I thought were good at being leaders, and picking their brains, and I found it uncomfortable early on because I like talking tech, and here I am talking to people that are totally not tech people; they're just good leaders, right? Mm-hmm. And that would be probably tip number 2 is either formally or informally. And for me, it's always been pretty informal. I've had mentors throughout my career, often my boss, but sometimes other people. And but they're just people that are willing to give some time and have a conversation about what they think work and don't work, and be honest and open. And from my side, being able to absorb and actually listen to what they were telling me.
Yeah.
Which, that's not always so easy either, right? Set your ego aside and say, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to have to rethink my entire, approach. So.
Yeah, I agree 100% with both of those. I know for me, it was, I had one of those, like, I don't want to say it's a rock bottom moment, but it was one of those really rough moments as an early manager when I had two people quit the same day. And I had just gotten a mentor because we had this leadership training at our company, and all the SVPs and EVPs, gave their little talk, and every single one of them said something to the effect of, if you're interested in being in having a mentor, just let me know. So I emailed pretty much all of them, and most people wouldn't take me, but one guy did, and he was an SVP of sales, which not tech related at all. He became a mentor, and after a couple of weeks of us meeting for lunch, I had these two guys quit. So I went to him and I was like, yeah, these guys quit same day. I think it's because they can make more money working for this other company or whatever. He's like, nah, I don't think that's it. And I said, well, what do you think it is? He's like, pretty sure it's your leadership style. And it was just like, oh, but it was what I needed to hear. I had to get that ego aside and realize that, yeah, you know what? I may be a good developer, but man, I suck at this leadership thing. I need to figure this out. And at that point, he put me on the path of reading books and getting intentional about actually figuring this out. So a mentor is almost a must, I think, when you're getting in there and getting started.
Can't agree more. Yeah. And I suspect most of us have some variation on your story.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can people, find out more about you and the projects you're working on, and maybe some of the books you've written, or connect with you?
The easiest way to find me is to go to Lhotka.net. That's my last name, .net. And it's not a very complicated website, but it does aim you at all the things that I'm involved with Magenic and CSLA and various other activities that I'm involved with.
All right. I'll link that up in the show notes. And again, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Don't forget to thank Rocky on Twitter and LinkedIn for coming on the show. And also, special thanks to Splashtop for sponsoring this episode. And if you're looking for a new or better value for remote computer access solution, see for yourself why so many people are leaving other tools like LogMeIn or TeamViewer and switching to Splashtop. It's fast, secure, competitively priced, and to learn more and start a free trial plus an exclusive 20% discount for your first year, visit ageekleader.com/splashtop. Again, that's ageekleader.com/SPLASHTOP, Splashtop.